What I'm trying to do on this channel is not to be contrarian, provocative, or anti-church. I'm trying to name and trace a single recurring pattern that appears again and again across Christian history, especially at moments when Christianity becomes settled, affluent, and institutionally secure. At the heart of the gospel, there is a claim that is difficult to live with, that following God is costly, that judgment is real, that conformity of the will to God matters, and that salvation is not guaranteed simply by membership, culture, or comfort. That claim was survivable and even clarifying when Christianity was poor, persecuted, marginal, and dangerous. It becomes far harder to sustain when Christianity is powerful, inherited, administratively managed, and psychologically optimized for stability. Again and again, when Christianity enters periods of wealth, protection, and influence, it reforms itself, not necessarily out of bad intent, but out of necessity, to make life livable for those who benefit most from the system. Over time, doctrines, emphases, and pastoral frameworks emerge that ease conscience, soften terror, abstract danger, and relocate responsibility inward, upward, or outward in ways that preserve legitimacy while reducing existential cost. What I'm interested in is that recurring move, not as an accusation against individuals, but as a structural pattern, a pattern that often marginalizes the poor, the rigorous, the frighteningly serious, and those on the fringes who still live close to danger, judgment, and dependence on God. A pattern that frequently reframes rigor as pride, warning as cruelty, and truth-telling as selfishness or lack of charity. This channel is an attempt to recover the edge that gets lost in those moments, not to glorify severity for its own sake, but to ask a difficult question. What happens to the gospel when it no longer costs very much? And whether Christianity can remain Christianity when its sharpest claims are consistently rounded off in the name of safety, peace, and manageability. That question is the kernel of everything on this channel.
Alex was speaking about the music of machinery, Judy.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dad.
But I do like music. Very much.
Swell. The records are right in the cabinet.
Well, is it okay with you, sir? Sure, kids. Go ahead. Well, thank you.
Pick something groovy, Alex.
What you're circling is not a list of objections, but one story told multiple times, with different actors, vocabularies, and justifications. I'll tell it as a single narrative kernel, then show how it reappears in each historical frame you named, not as accusation, but as pattern. The kernel, the story underneath all of it. At the heart of Christianity, there is an unbearable claim. Open quote, God demands total conformity of will under threat of judgment in a world saturated with spiritual danger, and most will fail, close quote. That claim is survivable in small communities, persecuted communities, poor communities, marginal communities. It is not survivable at scale in affluence under stability, power, and inheritance. So whenever Christianity becomes settled rather than exilic, affluent rather than poor, institutional rather than charismatic, protective rather than dangerous, it faces the same existential crisis. Open quote, how do we preserve the legitimacy of salvation while making life livable for those who benefit most from the system? Close quote. Every frame you mentioned is an answer to that crisis, not necessarily dishonest, often compassionate, almost always upward bending. That's the kernel. Now I'll walk it through each historical moment as a story, not a verdict. Number 1, Augustine, when terror meets empire. Before Augustine, Christianity largely exists in persecution, marginality, instability, expectation of judgment, strong emphasis on conformity of will through fear, effort, vigilance. Then Christianity becomes imperial. Suddenly, millions are baptized, moral rigor collapses at scale. Elites, administrators, families, soldiers, merchants must be Christian. The old ascetic model cannot govern an empire. The old gospel creates a crisis. Too many are failing, too many are damned. Too much terror, too much instability. Augustine's solution is not cynical. It is structural. Open quote. Shift the center of gravity from visible conformity to interior grace. Close quote. Grace becomes total, antecedent, decisive, explanatory. Failure is no longer primarily lack of effort, but lack of grace. This move does something crucial. It protects the legitimacy of salvation for the settled and powerful without requiring the terror discipline of the earlier church. But the cost is real. Fear of judgment softens. The narrowness of the road blurs. Moral terror becomes interiorized. The poor man's visible struggle loses its explanatory power. Christianity becomes psychologically survivable at scale. The kernel is already present. 2. Aquinas, when enchantment meets system. Medieval Christianity is still terrifying. Angels everywhere, demons everywhere, curses, saints, visions, miracles, heaven and hell felt close, folk religion thick with danger. But by Aquinas' time, the church is wealthy, university-based, clerically governed, philosophically ambitious. The enchanted, folk, dangerous cosmos cannot be administered cleanly, cannot be taught systematically, cannot be harmonized with aristocratic reason. Aquinas does not deny angels or demons. He abstracts them. Heaven becomes orderly, hierarchical, intelligible, metaphysically clean. This does two things at once. 1, it makes Christianity intellectually governable for elites. 2, it distances the poor from experiential nearness to the supernatural. The poor lose immediacy, terror, proximity, authority of experience. Religion moves from village and shrine to classroom and summa. Again, not malicious, but upward bending. Christianity becomes philosophically respectable. The kernel remains intact. Number 3. Alphonsus Liguori, when kings need absolution. By the early modern period, power is consolidated. Kings, courts, colonial systems, inherited privilege, complex moral lives, impossible to judge simply. The old moral theology condemns too much, binds consciences too tightly, threatens the legitimacy of rulers, destabilizes Christian states. Confessors face an impossible task: apply terrifying moral rigor to people who cannot live that way. Probabilism answers the crisis, not by denying sin, but by reframing culpability. Now, intention matters more than act. Doubt favors liberty. Multiple opinions justify leniency. Conscience becomes a negotiator. Again, this move protects elites, preserves institutional peace, avoids moral revolt. But the cost is clear. Moral seriousness lightens upward. Discipline bends toward the powerful. The poor remain bound to rigor. Conscience becomes elastic where power resides. Sin becomes manageable. The kernel persists. When modernity must be survived. By the 20th century, the stakes are existential. Mass education, democratic expectations, psychological fragility, pluralism, global affluence, trauma from wars. The old Catholicism is now too harsh, too fearful, too negative, pastorally impossible. The church faces another scale problem. Open quote, how do you preach judgment, sacrifice, and narrow salvation to a comfortable, educated, psychologically sensitive world? Close quote. Vatican II's answer is pastoral optimism. Primacy of conscience, emphasis on dialogue, near universal hope of salvation, silence on fewness of the saved, mercy foregrounded, warning backgrounded. Again, not cynical. But the effect is unmistakable. Fear of perdition evaporates. Rigor is pathologized. Prophetic speech becomes uncharitable. The poor, the intense, the fringe lose voice. Authority becomes administrative. Not terrifying Christianity becomes psychologically livable in modern affluence. The kernel reaches its mature form. Number 5. The through line, now stated plainly. Across all these moments, the same thing happens. Open quote. When Christianity gains wealth, stability, and power, it reforms itself to ease the conscience of those who benefit most, while reclassifying rigor, terror, and marginal voices as immature, dangerous, or selfish. Close quote. This is not contrarianism. It is structural memory. You are not opposing people. You are tracking what happens when the cross is asked to coexist with comfort. Number 6. Why the poor and fringe are always displaced. Because they embody the old kernel. dependence on God, proximity to danger, lack of insulation, lived fear, seriousness about judgment. They do not need abstraction, probabilism, optimism, or interiorization. So they become embarrassing, inconvenient, excessive, unbalanced. They are pushed away from authority not because they are wrong, but because they remind the system of what it has lost. 7. Why this sounds like contrarianism, but isn't Tarzan. From inside the settled church, any reminder of terror looks like cruelty. Any reminder of cost looks like pride. Any reminder of danger looks like madness. He is personalized. You're contrarian. You want to offend. You don't want peace. You don't love people. But the critique is not about you. It is about whether Christianity can remain Christianity once it no longer costs much. 8. The final line you can use and live by. Here is the cleanest narrative summary you can carry. Open quote, "I'm not opposing Christianity as it developed. I'm tracing what Christianity does to itself whenever it becomes safe for the powerful. And I'm asking whether the gospel survives that safety intact." Close quote. That's not contrarianism. That's remembering the edge.